You're listening to Mom and Doc Talk, where we talk all things healing pans and pandas with an emphasis on homeopathy.
Hi, it's Jody, the mom of the Mom and Doc Talk podcast. We're taking a short pause this summer to enjoy our families and hope you're doing the same. We're also doing some prep work for season 2 of the Mom and Doc Talk podcast. We've got some really exciting episodes coming your way starting August 27th. In the meantime, we wanted to give you guys the opportunity to catch up on any episodes that you might have missed or take a break. We know you need a break. You deserve a break. Here's a rebroadcast of one of our most popular episodes. We hope you enjoy it.
We are together for Mom and Doc Talks, where we talk all things healing pans and pandas with homeopathy, or with a special emphasis on homeopathy. We talk all things about pans and pandas and healing. Like today, we're not talking about homeopathy again. We are talking about integrative and functional medicine approaches that are often recommended for kiddos with pans and pandas. And we're going to talk a lot about the testing that comes in with that too, because the testing is different than the testing that you're going to go through to try and get a diagnosis. As we said in our last episode, Jody got she's gotten to like leapfrog over some things. And that's really what we're trying to do for you guys, is to help you leapfrog even further than Jody was able to leapfrog. One of her leapfrogs was that the PANDAS specialist she ended up with is somebody who already took a bit of an integrative approach. Not maybe as intensive as an integrative approach as some others, just knowing what his protocol tended to be, but still a more integrative approach than a lot of people are going to get, depending on where they're seeing a PANDAS specialist. So Jody, why don't we dive in with your experience with the PANDAS specialist once you started working with him?
So starting with him, he had this like whole little like printout he sent me home with of like things we're going to start doing. He sent me home with topical
LDN,
and
low
there
dose
we go.
naltrexone.
Yep. Sent me home with that. I'm like, oh, great. We got all these things to try. First thing I did, I had been given Avery ibuprofen on occasion, and I'm like, okay, it helps a little bit. But he gave me like a ibuprofen protocol, like a different longer term way of giving it and more consistent way of giving it.
Yeah.
And I did that and was like, whoa, like, holy cow, this works. But then, you stop doing it and it stops working. And so
you
like
keep doing it and you get stomach attacks, all sorts of.
And so it's almost like it was like addicting. Like I wanted to do it all the time because it gave her so much relief. It felt good to our family. It felt good to see her be okay for a little while. So it was almost like a drug to me, like trying to decide, like, do I do it? Do I not do it? So we established that worked, but I also established that we couldn't keep doing it. So we moved on to the next thing, which was the LDN. And with, his protocol, you start out at a really low dose. I'm like, great, rub a little bit on, we're good to go. And literally the next day, she was off the rails. And I called the office. I'm like, there's no way that tiny little amount could have done that to her. And not every kid responds that way to LDN, but for some reason with Avery, and I tried to get her on it multiple times. Like I would stop for a while and just let her settle. And then I would try and start back up. I was like putting a dot on her a day. And every single time when I would try to move up, she would just have like an extreme elevation in her symptoms. So we went to doing different antibiotics, and I know that we're going to talk about testing more in just a minute. But we were kind of in this realm where we were like, okay, now we can do this test and this test and that test. But each test like gave us something else. It's like we were chasing all of these different things with, oh, this antibiotic might be better, that antibiotic might be better. And then, at the same time, I'm still going back to the ibuprofen. So her GI problems that were a little bit over this amount of time are just becoming more and more and more. You're going to have to help me. I'm trying to remember what else we did with with
You
him.
probably did some antihistamines, you probably did some vitamin C, maybe some curcumin. Yeah.
Turmeric. That was the one thing that I was like, oh, okay, like this, I can tell this is helping a little bit. But it was indeed just a little bit. And I could tell, if I gave it to her for a while and then I missed a day, she would be worse that day. So that I feel like that was like the one thing from his practice that I was like, okay, this is a thing that works for us and I can do this.
Yeah. So turmeric or curcumin is the same thing. It's curcumin is the active ingredient in turmeric that we're looking for. It works really similarly to anti-inflammatories to ibuprofen. It has some COX-2 inhibition activity as well, which is why it's used so regularly. But I forgot to give the caveat at the beginning that we're talking more about things that you could actually get over the counter today. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the safest thing. So natural does not mean safe necessarily. And curcumin is actually a really good example of one that's not necessarily going to be safe for all kids, because curcumin can actually also increase dopamine activity. And for kids who have more of like an elevation in dopamine as part of their response with PANS, which some of them do, this could actually aggravate their symptoms and make them a whole heck of a lot worse.
Yeah.
I think you were also given magnesium.
Well, and I like there's a whole nother provider to roll into here is, during all of the before antibiotics and then ibuprofen, and her stomach was so torn up, and I'm like, okay, like this one natural thing kind of helps her. So I want to try and dive into the functional medicine world a little bit more. And so that's when we went to like a full-on functional medicine doctor, because I was like, I want to heal her gut, because we've messed her up so much. Like, what can we do to heal her body? And so that's when we jumped into the functional medicine doctor, and then just like tests and supplements and like everything just rained down on us. It was a lot.
Yeah. So the functional or the PANS doctor that you saw typically would recommend like vitamin C, curcumin, antihistamines, some antibiotics, and IVIG was typically what he would recommend. Maybe a few other things, but I think he even called it like his PANDAS pack at one point. And so let's chat a little bit about some of the functional and natural or integrative approaches that people can take. And so maybe I'll walk through some of the things that people go, and you interrupt me, Jody, when we get to something that you guys did. Okay. Because you've done most of them. You've honestly done most of them. So some people will shift gears and try to follow essentially similar protocols as we talked about in our last episode with the conventional recommendations, but try to find herbs or supplements that do similar actions. And so that's where we'll see people coming in with herbs that have antimicrobial activities, and like combinations of herbs together, or like a pre-made mix. We'll see people add in antifungal activities, like all various different types of things to try and kill all of the bugs, kill everything in the system, because we think that the bug is the problem, even though the bug is not the problem, the susceptibility is the problem. And so you'll see that approach. You'll see people using things like the curcumin or other anti-inflammatory herbs and supplements. You'll see people will throw in fish oil for a lot of these kids to try and help repair the neurons and to reduce inflammation. A lot of these kids end up negatively reacting to the fish oil because it can increase histamine issues, and some of these kids are really more sensitive to histamine. You'll see people throw in nutrients like certain amino acids to try and drive serotonin production, or herbs that act very similarly, like St. John's wort, that act very similarly to an SSRI. Again, trying to just do the same thing, but with a natural version. I personally actually am kind of odd as the naturopathic doctor that in many of these cases, I would almost prefer the pharmaceutical, because that is like precise, especially for these kids who are so darn sensitive. That is precise. And you know exactly what you're getting. Whereas like if you get curcumin from this company versus this company, which one is better, and which one might have some impurities or like that are potentially going to be really problematic for these kiddos. And like dose, it can vary from company to company, and even within the a company, like a product line. Not to mention the fact that like where you get it from makes the difference, because the products can be affected by storage place. Like if you get it from Amazon, are you actually getting a verified for sure this is the exact product, or are you getting an adulterated product? We've actually had kiddos who ended up finding it that they got some toxic metals from a supplement that they thought was a really reputable brand, that was actually just piled in, like the reputable brand plus a knockoff were piled into the same thing at the Amazon warehouse, because these are people who don't necessarily know the difference when they're stocking them together. They look the same, they look similar, it says the same thing, and they ended up being a knockoff that had tons of impurities in it, and they ended up getting quite ill from the supplement that was supposed to help them. So those are some of the things that you can start with. It sounds like you got a couple of those, trying to replace some nutrients that are used up regularly when there's chronic infections. Things like vitamin C and iron can tend to be really low when there's chronic infections, chronic stress. So those are like some starting points that people will go to. Also, like inositol is used a lot of times too, just as like a palliative for anxiety.
Yeah. I think I'm switching here a little bit on you, but I'm like remembering things as to like the testing that we did, because there was so like it was, and these were all the wormholes that we would go down. We did gut testing. Okay, we've got dysbiotic gut flora. Like, let's get her on probiotics, which made Avery way
makes
worse.
A lot of kids worse. Yeah.
We did testing for parasites. We've got a parasite issue. We need to do a parasite cleanse. We need to do genetic testing. And so here's all the like dump truck full of stuff that we found from genetic testing. And also here is the dump truck load of supplements. We need to start stuff to help with MTHFR. She's got a mitochondrial dysfunction. You need to give her this. There was like endless, like she's, she's not breaking down histamine. We need to give her something to help with that. Let's put her on DHIST. Well, at the time I didn't know Avery's allergic to pineapple. So DHIST made her worse because of the bromelain in it. Anyways, it's like we were chasing, and every single test, there were way more tests. And it was literally, this is where our one savings account that we had just completely went away. Because the test, nothing was covered by insurance. They were all like, nothing was cheaper than $150. And that's really minimal. We did what's the thing where you test to see which meds affect a child a certain way.
Yeah. So there's certain genetic tests that can be done. There's a couple of different companies that do it to look for genetic variants that will show how you respond to medications. Yeah.
And every single test that we did had like this protocol that came along with it. And so here I am with this 5-year-old little girl, and I'm like, you want me to have her swallow what? Which, number one, a pill in the beginning, because at the time she didn't swallow pills. So, we had to go through this whole kind of traumatic process for her at the time, because she just wasn't ready to be swallowing the pills. They had me put her on some formula, like some bovine formula that tasted horrible, that she was supposed to drink. No, it was something else. I don't even remember. It was like a gut rebuilding. You are probably right. I don't even remember what it was.
It was probably, if it wasn't colostrum alone, it was probably had colostrum in it. Yeah.
It tasted horrible. And I remember trying to drink it myself and I couldn't. And then trying to convince her to drink this thing to heal her stomach. And also, getting her on all of these supplements. And I had a schedule on the wall 3 times a day. I was giving her stuff. Each time she was upset about it, I was losing my mind trying to keep up with it. God forbid I left the house and had to leave it for someone else to take care of, and it got messed up. And then my wrath was coming. It was like the whole thing was just a complete and total mess. It it put so much more stress on us. And
Yeah.
there were a few things that helped a little bit. And I felt like we kind of had Avery to this little bit of a place where she was under control. But it really kind of, looking back at it, it's just that I had gotten better at managing and covering and hiding. And then the couple of things were helping a little bit, but it was so much, and it was so expensive. And
And you were so afraid to stop anything too, because what if you stop something and it
yes,
got worse? Like, even what you're pretty sure this is doing nothing, but what if it's like the combination of this and this, or what if I'm wrong? Because again, PANDS is the ultimate gaslighter.
yeah,
It just makes you doubt yourself and question everything.
yeah,
So yeah, there's a ton of testing that is likely to be recommended with a functional or an integrative provider. Some of the ones that Jody mentioned were some gut testing, which will likely lead to specific dietary protocols and recommendations for probiotics. Probiotics can be worse for these kids because again, it can increase histamine, and for some of them, they just have reactions to the bugs that are in there. It doesn't help that probiotics are just not really proving to be that effective in helping change your flora. They more like are a pass through, and they're a tiny fraction of what we actually have in our guts that we can grow in a lab and put in a pill that we can then swallow. So I used to recommend probiotics when I first got started learning about this, and have since stopped because they're not really helpful in the long run, as much as getting their guts healed and using homeopathy to help shift how they relate to food so they can actually have a healthy diet that will promote healthy growth of the colonies that we want to see, that are as robust and varied as they actually should be versus what we can see in a pill.
yeah.
So there's a lot of approach with the gut testing too, to like try and eliminate yeast and fungus, like all other types of
Yes.
things. And I think that, and with the parasites that you mentioned as well, that we are heading in the direction that we did early on with antibiotics, where we killed off a whole bunch of things and then realized, oh crap, a lot of these were actually good for us. And we're seeing that now too. There is beneficial yeast. There are beneficial parasites that we actually do better with. And now we're having to use therapies where we're giving these yeasts as a supplement, or we call them helminths instead of parasites, but we're using them therapeutically to try and restore normal function. And so we just need to be really cautious. If you're using anything that's anti, is probably taking out good guys with the bad guys.
Yeah.
And so it's generally better to help promote healing and promote restoration through homeopathy and dietary strategies. That said, you're probably also going to get a really strict diet. Did you get a really strict diet, Jody?
We got a really strict diet, and we found more allergies. So
yeah. And so allergy testing is another thing that can be done. So you can find food allergies through a test or through an elimination and challenge diet. The elimination and challenge diet is better because it's specific to you. You can see the symptoms that you're having. And the food allergy panels are some are better than others, but none are 100% perfect. And what they're really more likely to show you is that you're having some permeability of your gut, that things are getting through in bigger forms than they should, because they should be broken down in your gut. So it's not necessarily showing you a true allergy or a true sensitivity. It's showing you more that there's something that led to this showing up on a test where it shouldn't show up. So the food's not necessarily the problem. That said, it can contribute to inflammation. And so sometimes it's beneficial to identify foods that are bigger triggers for inflammation versus others, so that you can temporarily take them out while you're letting some healing happen. But it can be really hard too, right?
oh yeah.
At Resilience Naturopathic, we actually don't do really strict diets for kiddos because, one, they already have an increased risk for ARFID if they don't have it. So the avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, that is more OCD driven. They already are at risk for that if they don't have it. And so I don't want to increase anything or do anything that could increase their fear, their anxiety, their OCD, specifically around food. And then if they're lucky, we don't want to put these kids who are already different and isolated and scared and like struggling and make them even more different. So if they have any opportunity to go and do something that has food related to it, which most things do, making them unable to participate, it can sometimes worsen their state. So And there are advantages to doing it because it can really damp down some of the inflammation. It's just generally not sustainable long-term to stay on these forever.
Yeah.
That's what you found, right?
Yeah. It's really hard. It's hard on a little kid to go to a birthday party and not be able to, you know, drink the drink with blue or red dye in it, and not have the pizza, not have the birthday cake, all the things. That's hard. Holidays hard, school
Yeah.
hard, like all the food things. It's just extra stress. It's so hard for me not to talk about homeopathy whenever we talk about all this stuff, because and this is why I feel like if anybody is watching, like keep watching, because whenever we get to the point where we're talking about susceptible, because I say this because whenever I was here at the spot, I thought I was healing Avery's body. I thought, all right, like I'm in functional med now, like these supplements, these herbs, like all these things, this is how you heal a body. Like this is how you fix it. And even like going back to IVIG, oh, we're giving her a new immune system. And so I truly thought that the things that I was doing were going to heal her body and get her out of having all of these things. And I'm so grateful that we ended up getting to homeopathy, but that's why I say, like, don't stop listening now. I want everybody to get to more of the true healing, because some of these supplements do help kids. There's, the groups are a blessing, the moms are a blessing. But one of my things that I did that was not so great was literally any supplement that any mom ever talked about in a group. I tried it because I could get my hands on it. Yep. And I tried it. So along with what the, functional medicine doctor was giving us, I was trying other things too. And a couple of those things were all right. They kind of worked out, but nothing healed it. Nothing got rid of it. We just stayed in that space of her not being okay, not functioning.
Yeah. So there's a couple of more tests that I want to make sure that we do touch on, because they're likely to come up. And this sort of touches on what you're talking about, because these two in particular that I want to mention, which is functional nutrition testing and genetic testing. These are things that people will hold on to, like we have to do this. This is like, we've got this deficiency, we've got this genetic variant, like this is just what life is. And that's not actually 100% true. So functional nutrient testing is going to be looking for what we call functional versus frank deficiencies. So this is where you might have adequate intake, but the body's not using it appropriately. So this isn't like vitamin C deficiency leading to scurvy or vitamin D deficiency leading to rickets. This is like you're doing okay, but you're not optimal, or your body's maybe not utilizing it as well as it could. And the reality is that if you don't fix that underlying susceptibility and whatever the function is that's leading to that, which homeopathy addresses, you're just going to be taking those supplements forever, and your body's going to become less sensitive to them, and you're going to unintentionally drive pathways that you're not trying to drive, because biochemistry is forced when we're using nutrition supplements in high doses, herbs, and medications. It's forcing the biochemistry. And so it's like a highway system. And so you can't just choose one pathway that you want to force and to nudge along. There are downstream effects, and that's where we end up having side effects from medications or from supplements, or we have adverse effects because we're wanting to drive this pathway, but we're also driving this pathway. And we always try as humans to get one step ahead and like go one step further down the pathway, but there's always branches from it. So homeopathy can actually help with the functional nutrition deficiency, because it helps your body shift how it's dealing with the nutrients as long as you're getting adequate intake. It can be useful short term to give you some symptomatic relief, but it generally isn't going to end up being a long-term solution if you want to not have to take those 30 pills multiple times a day for the rest of your life. And then finally, the genetic testing that we'll talk about. There are lots of others too, but these are the main ones that we see. The genetic testing will be looking for what's called single nucleotide polymorphism. So this isn't something that's like a genetic disease. These are just variations in how some of our biochemical pathways and enzymes are working. And so we can see a lower function, but not a non-function. What will end up happening is similar to what I just described with the functional nutrient testing, that will say, okay, well, we've got this problem with this particular gene, which will make you be deficient in this or make you not use this as well. And then we'll force a pathway and then get the other pathways forced as well and accidentally make ourselves a little bit cuckoo bananas. And so some of the things that we're looking at here, Jody mentioned MTHFR, which is methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, which helps us translate folic acid into folate, which is the usable form of the synthetic folic acid. And it's responsible for lots of different processes downstream by making methyl groups. There's also things that you're going to look for related to detox pathways, how your body handles sulfates and various different things, how your body handles and whether it makes and how it processes neurotransmitters too. And so there's a lot of kiddos who end up having some of these slight variations that if you drive up one, you don't realize that the other one is turned way down, so you could drive the production of something that maybe could make a kid anxious, angry, and have insomnia, and not realize that you are driving it because of this gene over here, but this gene over here is lower functioning. And so now you're ramping it all up and now they can't get rid of it. And so that's some of the places that we can get stuck with genetic testing. People who do genetic counseling regularly and use like genomic medicine are going to be looking at a lot of these things. And they still have limitations. We have limitations with one, what we know, and it's still a fraction of what that actually is to know. And two, with the test itself. So like tests will change. Like some tests that used to check for some of those enzymes that are responsible for getting rid of the excitatory neurotransmitters don't test for them anymore. And so the genetic testing that you're going to get is very likely to be this narrow in its scope, and you're going to be missing a lot of things because are you looking for how psychiatric meds work? Are you looking for methylation pathways? Are you looking for detox pathways? Are you looking at the totality, but still have the limitations for what we actually already know, and not the other side effects or other things that are going to come about from the pieces that we're missing. So I know that Jody, you're just dying to talk about homeopathy, because homeopathy actually helped you not need to use some of the supplements that came about as a result of the genetic testing. So go ahead, talk about it.
Well, I think it's just funny because I remember in our very first appointment that we had, I was like dead set on the fact that there was these things that I was going to have to do forever. Like, and one of them was methylfolate. Like Avery was a horrible detoxer. I was going, like, she had this mutation. It's what she was stuck with. It stinks, but that's how it is for life. Yep. And so she has to take her methylfolate forever. So when she is 40 years old, I am going to be texting her once a day to make sure that she's taking her methylfolate. And that's just like how it is. That's how it works. And I thought that I had no idea that I had the ability to heal what was not functioning properly in her body. I had no idea that something was out there. I thought that methylfolate healed it. I didn't understand. And on top of that, like good diet, like talk about an insane wormhole of having these genetic tests and these, the pluses and the minuses and the broad explanation of like, oh my gosh, we're going to do all of these things for the rest of her life. And that's how it is. And now since going through homeopathy and like healing all of that dysfunction, we're not doing any of those things. Like we don't have issues from any, like there is no detox issues. There's no mitochondrial dysfunction. There's, we just don't have any of that anymore. And that's why the whole world has to know about homeopathy, because we've got the ability to, change the body and change how these genes are being expressed. And it's just amazing.
Yeah. I will say, and I think you will agree with me, that there is some value in some of these genetic tests because we then learn more about what we need to avoid. So to me, if you're going to use a genetic test, it's useful to learn where your some of your genetic susceptibilities are, so that you can maybe not eat enriched foods that have something that is a little bit more toxic to your body than somebody else's. So I think that the genetic testing is beneficial to help you know more what to avoid than what to take. It's just not used that way very often. That said, the reality is if you just avoid things that are made in factories, like food that's made in factories, chemicals that are made in factories, you're probably going to avoid most of the things that you would discover that you need to avoid on a genetic test. So the more you can stick with things that are resembling something that could be found in nature, the more likely you are to do well without needing a genetic test. Because again, not covered by insurance, generally expensive, quite confusing. And you'll read one variant, that's one genetic variant that says you need to have a lot of this supplement, and then this other one over here says you need to avoid this one, and it can get really overwhelming and confusing even for people with training. So
yeah.
And speaking of overwhelm, Jody, I think it's time that we wrap this episode unless you have something absolutely burning, because our next episode we're going to talk all about Jody's overwhelm and the overwhelm in general, even providers' overwhelm in having to learn about all of these triggers and chase all of these different things, and how to navigate what life looks like if you're actually trying to follow all of these recommendations that come about from all of these tests. And so we're going to chat about that in our next episode.
Bye.